Welcome to the J29 podcast, hosting conversations with American pastors about how they engage politics and culture in their preaching, discipleship, and mentoring. For more information on the J29 Coalition, visit j29coalition.com.
Dru, you just came out with a book thinking about the Old Testament and law. And I know that for many pastors, myself included, preaching, teaching, and discipling folks around stuff like the law is something that either we tend to avoid, or we kind of do a quick flyover, or we kind of just don't do it justice. We kind of name, we say things like, oh, well, now let's go to the Sermon on the Mount. Right. These things are confusing. There's so many of them. Let's just kind of get to, Jesus, and he's the ultimate law. And so that's kind of what we need to do. So with so many of us who pastor coming from that perspective, perhaps you could help us as we think about preaching, teaching, discipleship. First, if you were in a room full, you're at a coffee shop, there's half a dozen pastors there, and you could give them one bit of coaching around teaching and preaching Torah, what would it be?
Certainly the first thing would be, don't be embarrassed by the law. Because I think a lot of us, we read it and we're like, ooh, I don't like that thing I just read. I'm sure it makes sense somewhere in God's economy of his theology, but we can't place it. We don't know what to do with it. It sounds too harsh. It sounds reckless. And secondly, a good way to do it is to check yourself before you wreck yourself is just recall where you sit in regards to our legal thinking. I once had a student who he came back at me on something and said, well, yeah, but in the Old Testament, you get killed for everything, right? And I said, okay, let's name right now. Let's name all the things in the Old Testament that you can get killed for, right? That you can be executed for. And we went through all of them. And there's basically five big things that you can do that can get you executed. And I said, all right, now let's name the things in the United States that you can get executed for. And it turns out there's about, 50% more things in the United States you can get executed for today. And actually in the book, I went and did the research and looked up, there's even more than I originally had suspected, including placing a bomb at a bus terminal, which seems to really suppose some specific event in the past. Or hijacking a train, or killing an inmate in prison, which I think is actually a really good test case. I taught in a prison program last year, and I remember the prisoners just kind of insisting oh no, there are people who really, they need to be in here. You do not want them out on they're not going to recover. They're not, outside of Jesus, they're not street worthy. And then I was reading these laws, and it's, you need to have execution as an option for people who kill people in prison. And including, because you're like, well, prisoners killing each other, you can take the harsh view and be like, just let them kill each other, right? Well, they will also kill prison guards, right? And what do you do to somebody who's already got a life sentence, who's killed a prison guard? Give them another life sentence or two more life sentences? So there's this kind of thinking in our law that well, you got to have something to back up the goods when you really, really don't want, you have nothing left to encourage people to do the right thing or deter them from doing the wrong thing. So I think that kind of be embarrassed about the law, but let that emotion play out, and then go turn and say it's not like we're doing it all correctly and humanely and without any harsh penalties. And, you could think of other things like the entire system of justice in the Torah has no incarceration built into it. You can't, in fact, it's often the case that when somebody commits a crime against somebody else, they're actually brought closer together and put in direct relationship with each other. And it doesn't even presume that there's going to be repair between them. But the last thing that happens is you go away somewhere, pay your crimes, right? And the state doesn't take on your case on your behalf. It's actually settled by the families involved, by the town, the villages involved. So there's all kinds of things we do in our legal, and I'm not saying like we shouldn't have prisons or nobody should ever go to jail. I think if we brought Moses into the modern world and said, here's what we're doing, I think he would point out a lot of problems and say like, no, the Torah won't allow you to do that. But I don't think one of them would be like, you could never incarcerate people. I think he might say like, no, there's some people that like, geez, I wish we had jails like that back then to put someone who was going through a psychic break and trying to kill people. Right. So don't be embarrassed. Normalize the data, right? Remember that we too are committing, we too have a heinous law code. But the biblical law code is doing something different. It's not actually as heinous as it initially looks. And so I think cut it some slack and think creatively would be like number 3. Like, okay, give it some room to operate. The new phrase the kids are saying is "let them cook," right? Just let it do its thing for a second, and then you need to develop your imagination. Quite honestly, and I'll give a plug for a publisher, Langham Press, which publishes a lot of majority world scholars. They can help you here. It's not just them, but they have a nice selection of majority world scholars. Listen to people who live in worlds where the government is unjust, or where there is no government protecting people from crime. Like how do they deal with it at a local level? And you'll find very similar motifs and themes of, well, you can't send this person to jail. Well, how do we deal with this person who's acted so recklessly or done so much harm? And they're going to have various ways of settling those problems. And so thinking about, okay, what would be a situation where God would have to say this law to somebody? And why would he say it in this way? I'll give an example so I can get out of the abstract world here. The law for war brides, as we call it, where it says if you go and attack a city and kill all the men, which would be the normal thing to do because you don't want them, killing you, namely, and you see a woman who's good in your eye, which that whole phrase is problematic itself. Anytime something's good in somebody's eye, it's usually not a good thing unless it's God's eye. But you see a woman who's good in your eye. Now you could take her home to be your wife, but you have to wait a month, let her shave her head. You can't touch her. You can't ever divorce her. So unlike any other woman you would have married, you could have divorced her if there's some reason to divorce her. This woman, you can never divorce her. You can never lower her, the amount of food she gets. You can't mistreat her basically in any way. She's yours for life and there's no going back. You're like, that's harsh and it's weird, right? It's a weird thing to say. So all you have to do is put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's doing hand-to-hand combat, like not shooting from a rifle far away, which you have the same problem. What would be the temptation? What is this law trying to restrain of somebody who goes in, all the men are dead, and you see a woman that looks good to you, and you've been fighting? It seems to be targeting people who want to sexually assault people in that moment. And it's not saying, yes, you can sexually assault them. It's not even saying deferred sexual assault. I mean, something has to happen with this women and children as well, because they're now vulnerable. Like they don't have a husband or fathers to protect them. And so it says, yeah, go ahead and bring them in. But that thing that you really want to do because you're, you know what, in that moment, you have to defer that for a month, and you have to shave her head so she's no longer attractive, and you have to let her mourn her parents, and you have to take her on as a permanent wife. It basically takes all the incentive out of what somebody wants to do in that moment. So that's where I say give it some slack and think imaginatively about who this might be trying to protect. Actually, and notice what it's not saying. It's not ever saying don't ever go to war, don't ever kill all the men in another village. It's just presuming that's going to happen. It's not even necessarily talking about divinely sanctioned war. It just assumes there's going to be violence in this world. These things are going to happen. And here's how it can happen less bad than otherwise.
Okay. So I have on multiple occasions had folks who, we encourage people, you should read your Bible. So then they do. And they start in Genesis and they're like, this is fun.
That was me.
Yeah. This is fun. And then they get to like the, halfway through Exodus and they're like, hold on, stuff's out. And then in the Leviticus and then, oh my goodness. And they're perplexed because one of the assumptions is what you're seeing in the Bible is God telling you how things should be and how you should be.
Right.
A moral code perspective, right? And then they discover that God tells people to do stuff that they think shouldn't be. For instance, don't mistreat a slave presumes you have a slave.
Right. They're like, why would you ever have a slave?
Exactly. Why? Yeah. And so there's this frustration of, why didn't God just say, don't do slave stuff?
Yeah.
Help us, Dru.
I don't know why God didn't say that. So let me set that question aside, because I'm getting in the mind of God on that particular issue. But it's not just about slaves. I'll say that. It's about everything. I don't know why he didn't just say, be better, right?
Okay.
I think it's important to point out, this has been a particular trend in Christianity. I'm not going to call anybody's names out, but there's this kind of like, the temple is the greatest thing that ever happened to Israel, and God's law is perfect, and it's golden and holy and beautiful. And I'm like, are we reading this? I mean, that's again, I think you became a Christian when you were a young adult as well, and you read this for the first time, and you're like, wait, what?
What is happening?
Yeah, and and there's reasons that people tend to think this. Certainly in the days of Jesus, this view has been appropriated by some Hellenistic Jews. This idea, they have a very high view of the temple. They have a very high view of the law, that it all came directly down from heaven in almost a Quranic sense. So let's throw that to the side and say, what's actually going on here? It's not how things should be. It's a compromise document. This is how things can be, given the fact that everything is broken from front to back, and that God wants to be with his people, and he wants to extend justice and righteousness out to all the other people who aren't currently his people, or participating in the justice and righteousness that Israel should have been participating in. So he is telling them how to be, but I don't think there's anybody who reads the Torah and thinks, oh, this is how the world should be. So, there's a couple things going on here. Slavery is slavery. The person who you indenture yourself to, so you sell your labor to that person, but you're selling more than your labor. Like, you come live with them, they have to feed you. There's lots of rules about how to be treated. There's certainly a sense in which slavery is an economic and a labor issue, and that gets played out in the law as well. Even if somebody kills a slave, part of the issue is if somebody kills somebody else's slave, part of the issue is that person was counting on that slave to help them get the calories out of the ground so that everybody could survive year in and year out. So there's like this, not only does the slave's life need to be avenged by his family because it's a murder, but that person also needs to be paid back for all the labor that was lost, right? So that's a real issue that's present in their thinking. And there's all kinds of protections for slaves as well. Like, you can't steal people and sell them, which is what happened in Africa, and then later in the Americas and the Indies and Brazil. You can't hit a slave. And then there's these things about, well, what if you bring in a female, and again, can you give her to your son as a wife? There's these provisions. Slaves can say, hey, I want to stay with you for the rest of my life because I love this family so much. Or I've gotten married and I've had children in this household, and so therefore I have to stay here and stay with this household forever, which again is kind of warning you about what you should be doing when you sell yourself into slave status. But most of the slave description is about people who have fallen into poverty and sold themselves into slavery. It also could be people, which is dealt with in Exodus 22, people who stole something from somebody. So if you steal a sheep, you have to pay back 4 sheep. So it's a very steep recompense. But I would presume that if you stole 1 sheep, you probably don't have 4 sheep to give back, right? And so what's the remedy, what we call in legal terms today? The legal remedy is you now go work for that person. So again, they pull you closer to the very person that you harmed, and you become indentured to them in a slave relationship. But they can't hit you, they can't mistreat you, right? They can't do all the things that would have been normal things to do in what we consider like chattel slavery culture, where you own the body, you own everything about the person. So I don't want to whitewash slavery. It does have a different view of economics, and but part of the slavery thing too that's built in that doesn't make sense to us because we filter it through our view of the American peculiar institution of slavery, is like people need shelter and protection from people with bad intentions out there in the world. Women and children and elderly people especially need more protection because men are just physically bigger and can do more harm. And so bringing somebody in as a slave is also offering them food so that they don't starve, which is an actual issue in all of Israel, except for the very north. And then offering them the protection of your household so that if somebody touches them, it's as if it's touching you in some way. So there's all kinds of social dynamics that are very confusing to us as modern people who see ourselves as individuals out there in the world, getting our just desserts for all our hard work and all the greatness that is us, and aren't restricted by law in any kind. It's managing a very different worldview. And to the point where if you said like, hey, you're all now free, and if the Torah said, hey, okay, now that we're liberated from Egypt, you all are individually free to do whatever you want, form governments, do it all. And now you can write contracts for work with one another, but you have to live by yourself and you have to go over to their house for work. And I don't even think they would be able to understand, like, what world could you explain that to people in their situation where they would even understand what you were talking about, the concepts involved, et cetera. Esau McCulley does argue in his book, Reading While Black, and I think he's probably correct, that the Torah does seem to envision a world in which slavery in its present state would have been snuffed out within a few generations. There would be no need for it if Israel were doing what she was supposed to be doing. And again, one example of that would be the Torah also teaches that if your brother falls into poverty with respect to you, assuming that you've already given them food, you are supposed to lift them up, which means feed them, as well as you would a foreigner. So the assumption is you would do the same thing for a foreigner. You should do it for, and so and that's stated in several different ways across the Torah. There's this idea that if somebody's struggling, you help them. It doesn't say bring them in as a slave, but it does allow for when that does happen. Okay, so when you do bring them as a slave and don't do this other thing that I told you to do, now we're going to talk about how you can treat them and how you can't mistreat them.
So if I'm understanding you right, when we're preaching, teaching, helping our folks understand like these laws, commands, whatever you want to call them, they're not describing the world as it should be,
right?
Or the way it will be in the new heavens and new earth. What's happening here is some godly wisdom on how the world can be. What shall we say? Like less horrible,
right? Moderated atrocity, yeah.
Moderated atrocity. And it seems like you become a kind of person and you become a kind of community that eventually, if you were to live as this kind of community, some of these things that we're moderating will no longer be. Maybe like divorce or something like that too. Like, it's not, hey, when I give you this command about divorce, that I like it from God's perspective, but rather be the kind of people who don't do divorce. But if you're going to do divorce, do it in the least atrocious way possible.
Right. And in a way that protects the vulnerable person in the divorce typically, right? Because in the divorce, it's not just so you can divorce people. It's like, oh, and you also have to protect that person if you send them out. When you send out when you release your slaves at the end of the 6-year work cycle, or if you've hit them at all, then you have to release them. You have to send them out more wealthy than they came in, right? You have to send them out with more goods. Yeah, I will point out it's the same in the New Testament. Jesus is not like directing the church in the way that like he's not giving what ultimately will be new heavens and new earth behavior. He's giving things that that should be indicative of new heavens, new earth behavior, but it's in a broken world. And same thing with Paul and Peter and James and John. They're talking about, okay, given the situation, this is how we need to interact with each other and with the world around us in order for God to use us. In order to be the kind of people that he's actually formed us to be as a people. So it's not like the tune changes at all in the New Testament. And again, when it comes to slavery, it's not like Jesus says, you shall have no slaves among you. And it's not like Onesimus, it's not like Paul is saying to Onesimus, like, you should have never enslaved him in the first place. He's actually working within the constructs and the legal frameworks and the labor frameworks from which they sit, and moderating them in a better way towards what will eventually, you could imagine, a kind of blooming version in the new heavens and new earth.
So thinking about helping folks engage the text and then have it shape them. So the law is a shaping thing. What would be your recommendation for pastors who are thinking about, how can I help my people apply the text? So we love to hear, what's the application of the text? So one application I see, copy paste. Law says, don't do this, therefore I don't do that. Law says do this, and therefore I do it. What are some maybe healthier applications that we can help our people in?
Yeah. Let me give a quick apologetic plug for why the copy and paste is so dangerous. Because if you take that, you will very quickly realize that the law doesn't speak about a lot of things that we think are good and true and right and what it means to be. So the example I always give is, if you just want to do a 1-for-1, well, there is no law that says don't have sex before you're married. Right. Now, everybody, I think, agrees that as soon as you have sex, the law then says you are now
you're married.
Congratulations, you are now married, and we are treating you like you're married. And there's all kinds of provisions for vulnerability in those laws as well. But it's not an exhaustive code, as no code can be. Not even the U.S. code can be exhaustive. How to actually work out these principles? Well, one, I'm thinking kind of fresh about this. Is if you can't just do one Sunday where you say, okay, we're going to talk about law this Sunday. We're really talking about you yourself have to have a paradigm shift, that law is doing something different. If you haven't had that paradigm shift, that law is not like our modern law. It is not rules that you break or keep. The metaphor is you keep the law. So the break or keep the law is the metaphor we use today. There is no break or keep metaphor used in the Bible. There is a keep metaphor, but keep there, shamar, means like tending a garden, fostering something. You keep sheep, you keep a garden, right? So it's a collection of things that you foster and cultivate as a people.
Like, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Like so it's like this idea that there's some tending behavior. Am I my brother's keeper, right? Is like this idea that you're tending to things. Which again is an argument against it being rules that you either break or keep, even though it does have some statutes in there that are clearly like, don't eat blood. Like, what does that mean? I'm pretty sure it means don't eat blood.
Don't eat blood.
So those are in there, but that's not the nature of the law as a whole. That's not what it's doing. So you can't do it in a oneer. You can't like throw it in last minute, like as an aside, like, oh, I heard this thing on law, or I read this book. And just so you know, you can throw those little things in there. I think they will have little to no effect. For most people, it's going to have to be regular microdosing of the same idea over and over again from different angles, just as Jesus did with all his teaching. I mean, if you walk through the red letter Bible, I think it's true to say what you find is Jesus doesn't say much new as you progress through the Gospels. It's basically the same thing with just different analogies and different focuses on aspects of the kingdom of God and what we're called to. So I think you have to think in those terms. It is a many-faceted gem. It's complex. If you had to have a paradigm shift to get your mind around it, well, guess what? Everybody else in your church also has to have a paradigm shift, and those don't come cheap or easy. And here are the things that will absolutely put the brakes on people being able to have that paradigm shift. Pitting the gospel against the law, pitting Jesus against the Pharisees as if the Pharisees were the law people, and Jesus is all like, no, we're free in the spirit now somehow. The mythology that the Pharisees were somehow problematic because they were legalistic and they invented rules about the rules. I'm like, just do a legal analysis of your own church and what you teach people to do and not do, and you'll realize that we're all doing that. And as Jesus highlighted with the Pharisees, there are faithful ways to do that, and there are unfaithful ways to do that. So when you do those kind of cheap moves, law is works, but grace, is this free gift of God in which we operate. All of those kind of dichotomies, they don't at all match up with Scripture, and they reinforce in people's minds the worst thing you can do is ever create a rule or a way of being in the world that you just follow, right? And if it's not in the Bible clearly stated somewhere that you should do this, or the other with Jesus here again, these are very weird ways that you kind of create problems that we might not immediately recognize. Is you do the old, well, Jesus said it, so therefore it's a rule and we got to do it, right? I'm like, that is crazy talk. Jesus said lots of crazy things because he used a lot of indirect teaching, and he used arguments in extremis, as we call them, extreme arguments, in order to knock you off your perch and start listening to what he was saying. So, I don't know what percentage of Jesus's interactions, but a large percent of his interactions, you cannot read them literally. He literally does not mean what he's saying. Today I will be with you in paradise. He wouldn't shut up about the fact that he was going into Sheol, into the grave for 3 days. So I don't know what he meant by today I will be with you in paradise, but he didn't mean it literally, right? He meant something else. So who is my brother and mother? Like, I don't have brother. Who cares about my mother and brother? Whoever does listens to me, they're my brother. Like, you have to do the old, okay, I get what you're doing here, right? you almost want somebody someone in the crowd to go like, wait, is this a bit? Are you doing a thing here? And he just kind of winks over at you and says,
right.
But for everybody else, right?
Pluck out your eye, that kind of thing.
Yeah, pluck out your eye, get the plank out of your eye. So I think these are all ways in which we hinder people from seeing what the law is doing. And then again, going back and saying, okay, really trying to imagine in an agrarian subsistence world where there is no centralized government who has police, where the state takes up the case of the victim, which honestly creates as many problems as it solves, according to the biblical view of law. Where you don't have any of that guaranteed, then how do you protect people? Like, what are the kinds of things where you have to say, like, hey, you just can't do that? The example I give is, if you followed me around when my 4 children were like between ages 2 and 6, right? So they're all young at the same time. And I think you have kids that are small as well. If you just followed me around on a given day and just recorded, if you wrote down everything I said, I bet it would be a lot of, hey, don't touch that. Don't touch your sister. Put that down. Don't get so close, right? And if you then read all of that and said, well, let's develop Dru's theory of parenting based on that, it would be a really, not true version of my parenting, right? And so I think there's a way in which, when we're looking at the law, we have to say, like, look at the positive law, love your neighbors yourself, love God, create boundaries for people who might fall, right? Like, all kind, keep what do you call it? Not field markers, and don't move boundary markers, right? Like, that's an important thing because it actually mattered that people knew where other people were. There's all kinds of reasons why that would matter to people back then. When you run into these laws, you think, okay, there's these positive laws, the things that they were supposed to become, and then there are these laws where it's like, hey, if you do that, you are so going against everything we're trying to do here. Yeah. And in some cases, you are so going against it, we can't even have you in the society anymore. You're like a rogue astronaut on the space station who's tearing the thing apart. We might eject you out the spaceport. That's the only analogy I have, because I
like that analogy.
Well, I use it in the book, and it's to highlight that most people in Israel are in a very precarious situation year in and year out. Which, you've been to Israel, so you know the story on water and the ground, and but most people don't realize. They're like, oh, land of milk and honey, like there's just fruit dropping off the trees everywhere, and I'm like, no, there is a lot of anxiety in the laws. Or you can see the laws addressing a lot of these anxieties about how are we going to survive year in and year out. God's going to bring the rains. We have to do our work, but we need to make sure that we don't hoard the food, because that will be our temptation. And when there's scarcity, people hoard. And God's like, nope, I'm going to bring the rain. You do not hoard, right? And that is a variation on love your neighbor as yourself and love the foreigner as yourself, right? So, yeah, I think you're going to have to do long form teaching at some point, or you're going to have to hit it so regularly from different angles that people can, and then you'll do that for like a year, 52 sermons, and like a month later, people will finally go, "Wait, are you saying that the laws aren't just a bunch of rules that we break or keep?"
Right. Yes.
I've said that for 52 weeks solid, right? It's when it comes to paradigm shifts, they're tricky things that take a lot of effort, and they take people actually tuning in and really thinking hard. So,
yeah. Would you recommend using the words, like when we talk about law, instead of using law, like something like instruction or wisdom? Like,
yeah.
I'm just thinking rhetorically,
Yep.
there's a lot of baggage with the word law. Is it fair to say, well, these are God's instructions, or this is God's wisdom for life?
Yeah, as all Hebrew Bible people will point out to you, Torah does not mean law in any way that we mean law today. So in the same way that pistis does not mean faith in any way that we mean faith today. So I just replace those words when I read out loud in class or at church. I replace faith with trust, because that's what it means. And then law, I do instruction or guidance, even to give that sense that like he's there with us, trying to get us in the right direction. And as soon as you do that, a lot of it, a lot of what's going on in the law will just make more sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just as you're saying that, I'm imagining a lot of the people that I encounter, even who are unfamiliar with church, they're walking with this idea that what Christianity is, it's about the way to go to heaven when you die.
Right.
And they're bringing a judicial metaphor. God's a judge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a wrongdoer. Sin is about breaking God's law. And so what I need somebody to pay the price so I can go to heaven when I die. And so when they hear law, it's like, well, I don't like, hell is jail. Like, I don't want to go to jail.
Right.
That's why I obey the speed limit. And they're walking in with that judicial American kind of paradigm. And so shifting even just the word to instruction or guidance, it's like, well, wait a minute. Like,
guidance for what purpose, for whose benefit, right? And it's for your own benefit and the benefit of other people around you. And it is, I mean, there are, rules in there that they really are the kind of rules that you can either break or keep. I mean, they're in there for a reason. I think what we haven't talked about also, which is pretty important, is maybe something simple that pastors could do when they teach or preach, is like when you're preaching from Genesis or Exodus, especially those two texts, you could point out that there are laws that directly correspond to what's being said in those texts. So if you look at Leviticus 18, one of my easy go-to, you can't have sex with any close relatives. And then that's a principle, as we've talked about before. And then they give you lots of instances, because like you can imagine someone going, well, what do you mean by a close relative?
What's close?
Yeah, my father-in-law, and you go down that list, more than half of the instances they give, you can put a name from Genesis next to it. Father-in-law, brother, that's Abraham. Father-in-law would be Judah. To be fair, he didn't know. He thought she was just a prostitute. And then you get to the end of it, and it's like, and you can't take a sister as a rival wife while her sister is still alive. And you're like, oh, okay, I think I know who you're talking about, Jacob, right?
Yeah.
And the effect of this kind of interpenetrating nature, where narrative and law go together. By the way, in the ancient Near East, nobody does this. Law codes are law codes, and they only have laws. Narratives and epics are epics, and they only have story. Ritual text and omen text, they only have those things. So the Hebrew Bible is the only one that merges these together in this very creative way. And so you can imagine if somebody's like, well, why shouldn't you take a woman as your wife and then take her sister also as your wife? Like, what's wrong with that? And you could just go open up the scroll to the second part of Genesis, and I'm gonna show you a movie that will show you how this can go sideways on you 15 different ways, right?
Yeah.
And God is still faithful through that whole thing. He can still use you, but don't be that guy. So you can see all these instances here, mostly negative instances, quite honestly. But the implication is the law, you need a developed imagination of what this could look like in order to appreciate what the law is doing.
So it's similar to don't cook meth is a good principle, but sitting someone down to watch Breaking Bad start to finish, it's going to work on you. It's going to hopefully form you into a type of person who won't cook meth.
Was I telling you about the class in the lottery question? Maybe I was telling somebody else. I have a freshman class right now, so all 18-year-olds, and somehow we got on the lottery and it's up to $1 billion or something like that. And I said, well, and they're like, oh, are you going to play the lottery at $1 billion? I was like, no, $1 billion would ruin my life. And it was like a record scratch. And they're like, what do you mean it would ruin your life? And I was like, okay, somebody tell me one way in which, $1 billion, if I just given to you publicly, would ruin your life, right? They couldn't come up with a single way between 25 of them. One guy started eventually going like, oh yeah, don't a lot of those people go bankrupt? Don't they like lose touch with their family? And I'm like, yeah, why do they lose touch with their family? Like, so, and this is very much Proverbs 1-9 is the father is trying to develop, the father and the mother who speaks Torah, by the way, she's the only non-God person who speaks Torah in the Bible, are over the son's shoulder going, hey, I know you think this looks good, and you can't imagine how this could go. My kids are all young adults now, but they, just 7 years ago, they were all teenagers. And so I had a very healthy dose of, I know you can't see why this won't work out the way you think it's going to work out, but trust me, this is not what you think it is, right? And so I think the laws themselves are the kind of, hey, this is dangerous. You shouldn't do this because it's not going to be good for you. The narrative, and I think to some extent the rituals are, let's give you some interactions that will help you order your thinking, and here's some stories of how it can go bad. In the same way that you can imagine, I once said to a church group, I was like, if you found a bruised, beat up woman on the side of the road, half dead, should you bring her into your house? Say you live out in the country, should you bring her into your house and nurse her back to health or whatever? They're like, yeah, of course. I'm like, let me tell you the story from John Steinbeck's East of Eden. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't bring her into your house, but he develops your imagination how this could go really, really bad for you, right? In kind of horrible ways. So we need that. I mean, this is wisdom, because I think the law is part of a wisdom tradition. Wisdom requires a very robust imagination of all the different ways it could go wrong. Like all of those YouTube videos where somebody's like hanging on a fridge door because apparently they thought the fridge would just magically hold them. They didn't know how physics worked. So that's, I think, what a lot of what the narrative is doing, which is why the narrative, especially of the Torah, I think is so gritty and so dark and so unrelenting. Because it doesn't want you to have a happy ending thought. It's not trying to resolve anything for you. It's trying to help you understand how bad it will be if his instruction doesn't form and shape you.
Yeah. So like in Judges, there's that bit around like everyone's doing what's wise in their own mind, and this is the consequence of it.
Yep. This is where it will end. You'll just end up committing Sodom and Gomorrah like atrocities against your own countrymen,
right, rather
than foreigners, as it was in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
You too can be your own Sodom and Gomorrah. It can go that dark on you, which maybe I'm generalizing too much from my experience with modern young men. I feel like this is, well, it's not just men, women as well. Like this kind of romanticism that, oh, I'm going to have this kind of life and it's all just going to work out. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
right.
It's not, but that's okay. God will be with you. He will help you. He's going to, do all of these things, but this is going to go sideways at some point. And it's funny, the Psalms and the Torah are all trying to help you prepare for those times.
Yeah, right.
If you weren't raised in them, it's all trying to help you prepare for them.
That's good.
You sing "Why God Why" without a refrain that, oh, but we trust you at the end. I mean, there are Psalms where you don't cure the problem before you ever have to feel that way in real life. On a good day. course, no church I've been to ever does those kind of psalms as a part of their actual regular liturgy and worship. So,
yeah. And yet it is the human experience.
Ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Everybody has it. Yep.
Yeah. So as we're pastoring people, helping them see how the instruction or guidance of God shapes us into a type of person to navigate the life that he's given to us, so to speak.
Yeah. And the laws, and this is another one that throws people off. I should say American evangelicals and Catholics, I think, more than anybody else. But you can't do the law. You can't actually practice God's instruction by yourself. You can't be an ethical person by yourself. Most of the laws require team effort. And it's like, oh, great, you're not oppressing somebody, but everybody else in your village is got a scheme of oppression going on, right? So I say the law, the instruction, and this is true in the New Testament as well. It's the analogy is you're playing soccer, not tennis. So in soccer, you're only as good as your slowest player or your worst kicker or whatever. You can tell I don't play soccer, but yeah, and they have to work together as a team to create justice and righteousness. And if you think you can do it as a bunch of individuals, then that's like the American basketball team that went to the Olympics and got beat by Lithuania in the first round because all the American were hot shotter slam dunkers, and the Lithuanians were just like, let's just pass the ball. Let's play as a team.
Work as a team.
And they skunked us, right? So,
Oh, that's so good. So thinking about the Torah as a community forming.
Right. Community first. And because it forms the community, it forms the individuals in the community.
That's good.
Right. I think we tend to think, because we come through these Greek virtue, approaches, where it's all about you and your relationship with God, me developing myself, which is important, right? But if the focus is on the community being developed, that I think comes. I mean, you're a pastor. Maybe you could correct me if I've got this backwards, but I feel like that comes along with it. It's a freebie that individuals will see themselves within that community and how they participate. And you'll get all of the benefits of personal relationship with God and personal betterment and following Him. But if you do it the opposite way, you're reinforcing the individualistic approach, which then allows people to psychologically isolate themselves from others, transfer churches when they get confronted, do all the worst behaviors of us Christians today. So
yeah, well, we exist in ecosystems. And spiritual formation is an ecosystem project that,
absolutely.
We're all pulling from the same resources. And as we're being built up, we're actually contributing either for the benefit of, or sometimes to the detriment of the ecosystem. Yep. And if I only focus on my own growth, I'm actually it's selfishness in a sense.
Right.
Like I'm not giving also, and recognizing that even in the giving and the communal formation piece, it is the only way to actually grow as an individual. So yeah, I don't know if byproduct's the right word, but
yeah, I mean, that's been my experience. And I think, there's all kinds of cancerous overgrowths that come out of that individualistic approach that, then it be like the consumption model, like, I'm not getting what I need from the pastor's preaching,
not being fed.
I'm not being fed. Right. Cause that's what it's all about, is me being fed. Right.
Right.
And so it just becomes a deteriorating cycle where mature Christians can see past it and kind of move within those boundaries and still kind of do what they need to do. But why fight an uphill battle? I mean, why create the grief? But again, like everything, that's the paradigm everybody like the law, it's the paradigm everybody walks in the room with. And so thinking that you're going to get rid of it with one good sermon, or even 12 good sermons, right? It kind of has to be an ethos appropriated by everybody. So I think when we talk about preaching and teaching the law, you need to get people into the law to some extent, maybe even showing them things. I just wrote this book on it, so I'm like got all these examples in my head, but you take the funky ones, like there's a stretch in Deuteronomy where it's the two men fighting and the woman wants to grab the man's testicles who's beating up her husband to protect her husband. You have that. And then you have, if you're in a market, you can't keep cheat weights, like fraudulent money, basically. You can't cheat people out of their money by using fraudulent scales. And then the last thing is you have to go after Amalek, the one who picked off the Israelites as they were wandering in the way. And you're like, these are right next to each other. And you're like, what the heck? In fact, the ESV calls them miscellaneous laws.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but you can do real simple things like say, let's just assume for a second that they were actually packaged together like that for a reason. What pulls these three things together? Well, they all seem to have the same thing in mind. Is the woman is taking advantage of somebody who's wrestling with her husband to help her husband out. And it says like, no, even if somebody's beating up your husband, not killing them, but just beating them up, you can't take advantage of that guy when he's in a vulnerable position. I can't even imagine what position a guy would be in a fight where a woman could rip his testicles off.
Jiu-jitsu, I think.
I mean, something, right? But you can't do it. Fraudulent weights. When you own the weights, you determine how much people are paying. And they've actually found archaeologically cheat weights in Jerusalem from the Iron Age that are marked for a certain weight, but when you actually weigh them, they're like a third of that weight, right? So, and then Amalek, it specifically notes in there that why does Amalek need to be destroyed? And this is not in the story of Amalek. This is actually only in the law of Amalek. It gives you this detail because they went after the old and the poor stragglers, like the weak and the infirm who were straggling behind Israel, and they picked off the weakest people at their moment of weakness. So when you pull those together, you say, okay, whatever is going on here, these are very extreme, right? And weirdly put together. But maybe that extremity, like Jesus is teaching when he says really extreme things, maybe they're like trying to get you to focus in and say, oh, when I have an advantage over people, I can't take advantage. That's the moment when I need to be most careful that I'm not taking advantage in some way. And now you can start thinking about all kinds of places in life with our children, our spouses, our parents, our businesses, as employees, as bosses, all kinds of places where we can just say, okay, let's do a little survey, or a little, an advantage audit. Where do I have like secret advantage over someone?
Yeah, that's good.
Do them in, and where would I be tempted to really exploit that advantage? And so where do I need to be most careful? What moments do I need to be most careful in? Yeah. And that doesn't seem like a reach to me. Maybe some people think that's a reach, but I feel like that's just a natural outflow from at least what those laws are trying to do.
Yeah. And even in this example that you're giving, pastors, we can kind of do that. Like I'm reading this thing. It's strange. I've been meditating on it. Here's a thought. What do you think? And that's even equipping them to think about the text, not as find the Bible answer, right, but engage the text and mull it over.
Yeah. Treat it like wisdom.
Yeah. And pastors not being Bible answer person to resolve the tension, but show I'm engaging in this tension. Why are these three verses together? But one thing that came to my mind, as opposed to here's the authoritative teaching. Deuteronomy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
And I think, and then also setting the task to when they figure it out. And my view is always the wisdom in the room is greater than the wisdom of any individual in the room. Yeah. So when they ultimately figure it out or figure out something slightly better than you even thought of, then you say, is this true elsewhere in Scripture? Like, do we see this ethic that seems to be very prominent in this passage? Do we see it elsewhere? And then let them trace it out and popcorn it, and then you can start calling balls and strikes. Like, oh, that sounds like it, but that's not actually not quite it. So good try, but let's see if we can find something else that. And that helps people understand. Like, oh, this is a whole matrix of teaching. And I think that helps people to alleviate, like, okay, this weird law, I didn't understand it. But whatever this weird law is doing, it's participating in this larger view of what it means to be an ethical person in the world, or moral, I would say just to be one of God's children in the world. So,
yeah, that's good. Well, Drew, thank you so much for guiding us through thinking more deeply about biblical instruction and guidance. Where can people find you and your work?
I am at Dru Johnson, drujohnson.com is my narcissism hole on the internet.
Good.
And then, I have books and stuff, and we have a podcast, the Biblical Mind Podcast, where it's a variety show. We talk to anybody who can, including yourself, who can connect what they're doing to Scripture in some meaningful way. Like, so we that's who we love to talk to the most, and that's artist, psychologist, archaeologist, historians. We talk to all kinds of people.
Love it. Dru, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Caleb.
Thank you for listening to the J29 Coalition podcast. For more information, visit j29coalition.com.